I always thought betrayal would come with warning signs. Late nights, missed calls, lipstick on collars. But when the truth finally found me after 14 years of marriage, it came crashing down in silence, tearing apart the life I thought was unshakable. My name is Christy. I'm 35, and for 14 years I was Jacob's wife. We met when I was barely 21, in the summer of my last year of college. He was charming, confident, a little older, already working at a law firm while I was just figuring out what I wanted to do with my life. He swept me off my feet in a way that made me believe love was supposed to be both exhilarating and safe. He was stability and thrill in one package. And to a girl like me who had grown up in a quiet small town with cautious parents, that combination was intoxicating. Within 2 years we were married, and I thought I had hit the jackpot. The first years of our marriage were golden. Jacob worked long hours, but he made time for me. We bought a small house with a white fence, the kind of place I used to draw in the margins of my notebooks when I was dreaming of adulthood. We laughed often, traveled when we could afford it, and spent lazy Sundays curled up on the couch with takeout and movies. He called me his rock, and I believed him when he said he couldn't imagine life without me. I built my entire identity around being his wife, his partner, his confidant. But time has a way of eroding the glossy surface of things. As the years went by, his hours grew longer. At first, it made sense. He was climbing the ladder at the firm, chasing partnership, providing for us. I told myself the sacrifices were temporary, but the late nights became routine. The phone calls he took in hushed tones grew longer. The weekend trips he said were networking retreats became more frequent. I learned to live with the quiet emptiness of our home, convincing myself that this was what success looked like. I used to joke to my friends that I was married to his job, but underneath the laughter there was a hollow ache. Still, I didn't suspect betrayal. I thought he was ambitious, driven, maybe even neglectful, but never unfaithful. I had been raised to believe that trust was the foundation of marriage, and I gave him mine freely, unquestioningly. The first crack came on an ordinary Tuesday. Jacob had left for another late night at the office, and I was folding laundry when his phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. He never left his phone behind. Ever. My first instinct was to ignore it, to respect the boundaries we'd always kept, but something about the repeated buzzing tugged at me. The screen lit up with a name I didn't recognize. Clara. The message preview was short but sharp. Can't wait to see you again tonight. Counting the hours, I froze. My hands went cold, the laundry slipping from my fingers to the floor. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might break through my chest. A dozen explanations raced through my mind. Maybe Clara was a colleague, maybe it was about work, maybe it was innocent. But the words didn't sound like business. They sounded like longing, desire. I didn't open the phone. I couldn't. I stood there, staring at the glowing screen until it dimmed again, leaving me in the silence of our kitchen with only the sound of my own ragged breathing. That night, Jacob came home past midnight, smelling faintly of cologne I didn't recognize. I asked him how his day was. He kissed my cheek, smiled tiredly, and said, "Busy as hell, but good." And I smiled back, pretending nothing had changed, even though everything had. For weeks, I carried the weight of that message alone. I didn't tell my friends, didn't confide in my mother, didn't confront Jacob. I told myself I needed more proof, that I couldn't accuse him of something so devastating without certainty. So I watched. I listened. I became a detective in my own marriage, noticing things I had once brushed off. The way he angled his phone away from me, the sudden attention to his wardrobe, the late-night showers. One evening, when he said he had to stay late again, I decided to follow him. My hands shook as I drove slowly behind his car, far enough not to be noticed, close enough to keep him in sight. He didn't go to the office. He drove to a quiet restaurant on the edge of town, the kind of place we used to go for anniversaries. I parked across the street, my stomach twisting, and watched as a woman stepped out of a silver sedan and walked toward him. Clara. I didn't know how I knew it was her, but I did. She was younger, maybe late 20s, with long dark hair and a confident stride. He hugged her like he belonged to her, kissed her like I didn't exist, and led her inside. I sat in my car numb, watching through the restaurant window as they laughed. As he touched her hand as she leaned into him, it was like watching my entire marriage shatter in real time. Every laugh, every glance, every stolen touch was a knife in my chest. After an hour, I couldn't take it anymore. I drove home, tears blurring my vision, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. That night, when Jacob came home smelling faintly of wine, I pretended to be asleep. I couldn't face him, not yet. My mind was a storm, torn between rage and despair, love and hate. 14 years of my life, and this was what it came down to? A stranger in my kitchen and another woman in his arms? The days that followed were a blur. I went through the motions at work, smiled at neighbors, cooked dinners I couldn't eat. Inside, I was breaking. I replayed every memory, every promise, wondering which ones had been lies. Was he unfaithful all along, or had something changed? Did he ever really love me, or was I just convenient? I started keeping a journal, writing down every suspicion, every observation. It was my only outlet, the only place I could pour the pain without judgment. In those pages, I began to piece together a plan, not just to confront him, but to make him feel the devastation he had dealt me. Because here's the thing, betrayal doesn't just wound. It awakens something, a hunger for truth, a thirst for justice, and in my case, a desire for revenge that grew stronger with every lie he told, every smile he faked, every night he left me alone in the house we'd built together. I knew I couldn't rush it. If I confronted him too soon, he'd deny it, twist it, maybe even make me feel crazy. Men like Jacob were skilled at manipulation. No, I needed to be smart. I needed to gather proof, to prepare myself, to build a fortress around my heart before I went to war. So I waited. I watched. And with each passing day, the Christy he thought he knew, the soft, trusting wife, was fading. In her place, a new version of me was being born. One who would no longer be erased. One who would no longer be betrayed in silence, and one who would make Jacob regret the day he chose to break our vows. I woke up the morning after following Jacob to that restaurant with a weight in my chest, so heavy it felt like my body might sink through the mattress. The sun was streaming through the blinds, the house was quiet, and for a moment I allowed myself to pretend that everything was fine. That Jacob was faithful, that my marriage was whole, that the life we had built was not one elaborate illusion. But then I rolled over, smelled the faint trace of cologne on his side of the bed, one that wasn't the one I had ever bought him, and the truth hit me all over again. He was cheating on me. My husband, the man I had stood beside for 14 years, the man I thought I knew better than anyone, had betrayed me. I didn't confront him that morning. Instead, I made him coffee, kissed his cheek when he left for work, and smiled as though I were blind. I felt sick as I did it, but I knew I wasn't ready. Not yet. I needed more than anger. I needed strategy. My mind was already shifting from despair to determination, and I understood something about myself in that moment. I was not going to be one of those women who simply discovered an affair and walked away with her dignity alone. I was going to make Jacob regret ever thinking he could play me for a fool. The first thing I did was buy a second phone. I told myself it was just in case, a way to keep my notes and records separate, but really it was a symbol. This was my weapon, my tool, my secret. I started documenting everything. Every late night, every suspicious phone call, every lie about where he had been. I snapped pictures of receipts I found in his pockets. Tiny slips of paper from restaurants we never went to, bars we never visited. I checked our joint credit card statements online, something I had rarely bothered with before, and I found charges for hotel rooms, expensive dinners, jewelry I had never received. Each discovery was a stab to the heart, but it was also fuel for the fire that was growing inside me. I began to pay attention to patterns. Clara, I realized, wasn't just a fling. She was consistent. Her name popped up on his phone at least twice a week, sometimes under a fake label, but always traceable if I looked closely enough. He started leaving earlier in the mornings, coming home later, wearing cologne even when he claimed to be going to the gym. It was obvious once I looked with clear eyes. He wasn't just cheating. He was building a second life with her, at night. When Jacob slept soundly beside me, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, imagining all the ways I could destroy that second life. My anger wasn't wild anymore. It was sharp, focused, deliberate. Revenge became less of an impulse and more of a plan. I started small. I set up a meeting with a private investigator, a woman recommended by a friend of mine who had gone through a messy divorce. Her name was Dana, and she was everything I needed: professional, discreet, and fiercely competent. Sitting across from her in a quiet cafe, I spilled the whole story, my voice shaking but my resolve firm. She listened without judgment, taking notes, and when I finished, she nodded. "You're right to gather proof before you confront him," she said. "If you go in blind, he'll gaslight you, deny everything. But with evidence, you hold the power." So we made a plan. She would follow Jacob on the nights he claimed to be working late, photograph him with Clara, document the times and locations. She assured me she'd handled dozens of cases like mine, and her confidence steadied me. Within a week, she delivered the first set of photos. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at glossy images of my husband walking hand in hand with Clara, kissing her outside a hotel, laughing with her at a bar. The man in those photos didn't look burdened by guilt or shame. He looked happy, carefree, alive in a way he hadn't looked with me in years. The sight made me nauseous, but it also hardened my resolve. If Jacob thought he could build a future with Clara while keeping me in the shadows, he was about to learn how wrong he was. I didn't just want to end the affair. I wanted to dismantle his life piece by piece, the way he had dismantled mine without ever asking my permission. That meant I needed to think bigger than just exposing him. I needed to hit him where it hurt most: his career, his reputation, his finances. Jacob's job was his pride. He had spent years clawing his way up the ladder at the firm, and he was on the cusp of being named partner. I knew that if word of his affair and the financial trail of deception that came with it reached the right ears, his chances would evaporate. But I couldn't just march into his office with photos. I needed to time it perfectly to make sure that when the bomb dropped, it did maximum damage. In the meantime, I continued playing the dutiful wife. I cooked his favorite meals, asked about his day, even laughed at his jokes. It was sickening, but it gave me cover. He had no idea I knew, no clue that every smile I gave him was a mask. And beneath that mask, I was sharpening my knives. Dana's reports grew thicker each week. More photos, more details, times, dates, places. Clara wasn't just a mistress. She was practically a second wife. They went shopping together, she wore jewelry he bought her, they stayed in hotels I didn't even know existed in our city. I read every word, memorized every photo, and added it all to my growing file. But the real turning point came one night when Jacob slipped up. He came home late, clearly drunk, and left his phone on the nightstand while he stumbled into the bathroom. My heart raced as I picked it up, my hands trembling, and scrolled through his messages. Most were innocuous, but then I found the thread with Clara. "Can't wait until we don't have to sneak around anymore," she had written. Soon, Jacob replied, "I just need to figure out how to handle Christy." Handle. That word seared into my brain. After 14 years, after everything we had built, I was a problem to be handled. Not a partner, not a wife, not even a person, just an obstacle in his way. That was the moment the last remnants of love I had for him burned to ash. I wasn't going to be handled. I was going to be reckoned with. The next morning, while Jacob slept off his hangover, I forwarded the entire conversation to my secret phone and deleted the evidence. Then I stood in the kitchen, sipping coffee, and felt something I hadn't felt in weeks: clarity. I knew exactly what I had to do. Step 1 was financial. Jacob and I had joint accounts, but he had opened several credit cards in his own name, ones I had only recently discovered. I dug deeper, requesting statements, and what I found confirmed what I had suspected. He was funneling money into Clara. Lavish dinners, expensive gifts, hotel suites, it was all there, spelled out in black and white. I copied everything, creating a file so detailed it could ruin him in court. Step 2 was reputation. Jacob cared deeply about how people saw him. He thrived on being admired, respected, envied. I started quietly planting seeds among our mutual friends. Little comments, subtle questions. "Have you noticed how often Jacob's working late?" "Funny, he never takes me to that restaurant." People talk, and I knew it was only a matter of time before the whispers reached him. Step 3 was timing. His firm was set to announce the next wave of promotions in 2 months. I knew I had to hold everything until then. If I struck too early, he'd have time to recover, to spin the story. But if I waited until just before the announcement, I could destroy his chances completely. In those 2 months, I played my role perfectly. I smiled at him across dinner, kissed him goodbye in the mornings, even went with him to a firm event where he paraded me around like the perfect wife. Inside, I was seething, but on the outside, I was flawless. And because of that, he never suspected a thing. Dana continued her surveillance, and the evidence piled higher. I discovered that Jacob wasn't just careless, he was arrogant. He thought he was untouchable, that I was too naive to see what was right in front of me. He underestimated me, and that was his greatest mistake. The night before the promotion announcements, I made my move. I slipped an anonymous envelope onto the desk of the managing partner at Jacob's firm. Inside were photos, financial records, and copies of his messages to Clara. I didn't sign it. Didn't include a note, just the cold, hard truth. The next morning, I watched Jacob dress for work, humming to himself, oblivious to the storm about to hit. He kissed me goodbye, promised we'd celebrate that night, and walked out the door. I sat at the kitchen table, sipping my coffee, and waited. By noon, the calls started. First from his office, then from him. I didn't answer. I let them pile up, each voicemail more desperate than the last. By 3 o'clock, I knew. He wasn't going to be partner. He wasn't even going to have a job much longer. When he finally came home that evening, his face was pale, his hands shaking. "Christy," he said, his voice hoarse, "we need to talk." I looked at him, calm, collected, my file of evidence sitting neatly on the table between us. "Yes," I said softly, "we do." Jacob looked like a man who had walked through fire and come out burned but not yet charred to ashes. His suit was rumpled, his tie hanging loose, his once confident posture slumped as though the weight of the world had been tied to his shoulders. For a moment, I almost pitied him, almost. But then I remembered every late night, every lie, Every touch he gave Clara while I sat alone in our home waiting for a husband who never came. The pity evaporated, replaced with the cold satisfaction of a woman who knows she holds the upper hand. He sat down across from me at the kitchen table, the same table where we had once shared dinners, laughter, plans for the future. Now it was a battlefield, and the neatly stacked folder between us was my arsenal. He glanced at it, his jaw tightening, and I saw the flicker of fear in his eyes. That fear, I realized, was my power. "Christy," he started, his voice low, almost pleading. "I know you're angry. I know you've probably seen things that—" "Stop," I said sharply, my voice steadier than I felt. "Don't insult me by pretending this is about what I've seen. This is about what you've done. And what you've destroyed?" He opened his mouth, then closed it again, running a hand through his hair. For a man who had always been so smooth, so quick with words, his silence was deafening. I leaned forward, sliding the folder toward him. "Do you know what this is?" He hesitated before opening it, flipping through the photos, the credit card statements, the copies of his text messages to Clara. His face grew paler with each page until he finally pushed it away, his hands trembling. "You've been spying on me," he said, his voice shaking. "No," I corrected him coldly. "I've been documenting the truth. Because you were never going to admit it on your own." He swallowed hard, his eyes darting toward me. "Christy, please, it wasn't supposed to be like this." "Clara, she doesn't mean anything. I was stupid. I got caught up in—" "Don't," I cut him off again. "Don't you dare diminish this. 14 years of marriage, Jacob. 14 years, and you threw it away for someone who was never going to give you what I gave you. You didn't just cheat on me. You betrayed me. You humiliated me. You erased me." Tears welled in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Not now, not in front of him. He reached across the table as if to take my hand, but I pulled back. "Christy, I love you. I never stopped loving you." I laughed then, a sharp, bitter sound that didn't feel like it belonged to me. "Love? You call this love? Love isn't sneaking around in hotel rooms, spending our money on another woman, planning a future where I'm just an obstacle to be handled." His face crumpled at that, and I knew he realized I'd seen the messages. He buried his face in his hands, groaning. God, what have I done? I watched him for a long moment, the man I had once adored now broken and small before me. But I didn't feel sorry for him. Not anymore. "You've done enough," I said finally, "and now you're going to face the consequences." The next few weeks were a blur of chaos, for him, not for me. His firm officially terminated him, citing conduct unbecoming of a potential partner and financial improprieties uncovered in the investigation. Word spread quickly in our social circle, and the whispers turned into outright gossip. Friends who once envied us now avoided him, their eyes filled with pity or judgment whenever they saw me. Clara disappeared from the picture almost immediately, likely realizing that the man she thought would elevate her was now radioactive. At home, Jacob tried everything: apologies, promises, tears. He begged me for counseling, for another chance, for time to prove himself. But each plea only solidified my resolve. He wasn't sorry for betraying me. He was sorry for getting caught. I began the process of disentangling our lives. I met with a divorce lawyer, a sharp woman named Alicia, who listened patiently as I laid out the evidence. She smiled grimly when I finished. "You've built an airtight case," she said. "With this, you'll have the upper hand in every negotiation. Property, alimony, even his pension. He won't be able to touch you." The thought was both liberating and terrifying. For 14 years, my identity had been intertwined with Jacob's. The idea of standing alone was daunting, but the idea of staying with him was unbearable. At night, when the house was quiet, I would sit in the living room and think about the life we had built. The memories weren't all bad. There had been love once, laughter, joy. But those memories now felt like photographs left out in the sun, faded and brittle, reminders of something that no longer existed. One evening, Jacob came home with flowers, his eyes red from crying. He placed them on the table in front of me. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness," he said, his voice breaking. "But I can't lose you, Christy. You're my life." I looked at the flowers, then at him, and felt nothing but emptiness. "You lost me the moment you chose her," I said softly. "There's no coming back from that." His tears fell freely then, but I didn't reach out to comfort him. Not anymore. The divorce proceedings moved quickly, thanks to the mountain of evidence I had collected. Jacob tried to fight at first, but Alicia dismantled every argument he made. In the end, he had no choice but to settle. I kept the house, most of our savings, and even secured spousal support. Watching him sign the papers, his hands shaking, was the final act of justice. But revenge, I realized, wasn't just about legal victories. It was about reclaiming myself, about proving that I was more than the victim of his betrayal. I started going to the gym again, taking classes I had always put off, reconnecting with friends I had lost touch with. Piece by piece, I rebuilt myself from the wreckage of our marriage, and with each step, I grew stronger. One night, weeks after the divorce was finalized, I found myself standing in front of the mirror looking at a woman I barely recognized. She was scarred, yes, but she was also powerful, resilient, unbreakable. Jacob had tried to reduce me to a problem to be handled, but instead he had created a force he could never control. I smiled at my reflection, a real smile this time, and whispered to myself, "You did it. You survived." And for the first time in a long time, I believed it. But the story wasn't over yet, because survival wasn't enough. Jacob had destroyed my trust, my marriage, my sense of security. And now it was time for me to decide what kind of future I wanted to build from the ashes he left behind. The first morning I woke up alone in the house after Jacob officially moved out, I was struck by the silence. It was not the heavy, suffocating silence I had felt during the months I suspected his betrayal. This silence was lighter, clearer, like the air after a storm. The absence of his footsteps, his phone calls, his fake late-night explanations left behind a space that felt strangely alive. I padded barefoot into the kitchen, made coffee just for myself, and sat by the window with the mug cradled in my hands. For the first time in 14 years, I wasn't waiting for anyone, wasn't planning my day around another person's whims. The quiet told me something I hadn't realized until then. I was free, but freedom after betrayal is complicated. It isn't all triumph and relief. It comes with shadows that creep in during the night, memories that replay when you least expect them, and questions that claw at you in the early morning hours. Was I blind? Did I ignore the signs? Could I have done something differently? These thoughts came uninvited, and for weeks I wrestled with them. Some nights I cried until the pillow was damp, mourning the life I thought I had, mourning the girl I had been when I first said I do. Other nights I felt so angry I had to get out of bed and pace the living room, fists clenched, fury buzzing in my veins. Healing, I realized, wasn't a straight path. It was messy, jagged, full of setbacks and small victories. I started therapy not because I felt broken, but because I wanted to make sure I didn't carry Jacob's betrayal into the rest of my life. My therapist, a calm woman named Linda with a voice like a lullaby, helped me unpack the weight I had been carrying. She told me something that stayed with me. Betrayal doesn't mean you failed. It means the other person chose dishonesty. Don't make their choices your reflection. Those words became a mantra. Each time I started to blame myself, I repeated them until the shame eased. At the same time, I began to reclaim the parts of me I had lost in marriage. I signed up for a painting class, something I had always loved in college but abandoned when life became consumed with Jacob's ambitions. Standing in front of a blank canvas, brush in hand, I felt a spark I hadn't felt in years. The colors, the textures, the freedom of creating something just for me, it was like breathing life back into my soul. I also reconnected with friends I had drifted from. Women who had once been my sisters in late-night talks and spontaneous road trips, but who I had neglected while playing the role of the perfect wife. They welcomed me back with open arms, no judgment, just love. We went out for dinners, laughed over wine, and talked honestly about the pain and resilience of our lives. For the first time in years, I didn't feel alone. Meanwhile, Jacob's life continued to unravel, though I didn't go out of my way to follow the details. Word traveled fast enough. He struggled to find a new job. His reputation was tarnished, and no firm wanted to take the risk. Clara, unsurprisingly, disappeared completely once his status and money were gone. When mutual friends mentioned seeing him at a bar, drinking alone, I felt nothing. No pity, no longing, no joy. Just indifference. That indifference was my victory. The divorce settlement gave me the financial security I needed to start over. I invested part of the money into a small art studio space downtown, a dream I had buried long ago. I opened the doors quietly, offering classes to kids and adults, and to my surprise, it grew quickly. Parents loved that their children had a creative outlet, and adults loved that they could escape their stressful lives for a few hours each week. Watching people find joy in something I provided filled me with a sense of purpose I had never felt in all the years of being Jacob's shadow. One evening, after locking up the studio, I stood outside on the sidewalk and looked at the sign with my name on it. Christy's Studio. My name, not his. Not ours. Mine. Tears welled in my eyes, not from sadness this time, but from pride. Jacob had tried to erase me, to reduce me to a problem to be handled. But instead, I had risen from the ashes and built something entirely my own. But healing wasn't just about rebuilding. It was about reclaiming my voice. So I began to write. Late at night, after classes, I would sit at my desk and pour my story onto the page. I didn't hold back. I wrote about the betrayal, the rage, the grief, the revenge, the strength. It was raw, messy, unpolished, but it was mine. I didn't know if I would ever share it with the world, but putting it into words gave me clarity, like I was taking back control of the narrative. Months passed, and with each passing day, I grew lighter. The pain dulled, the memories softened, and the woman I had become started to feel like someone I could truly love. I no longer defined myself by what Jacob had done to me. I defined myself by how I had survived, how I had fought back, how I had rebuilt. One afternoon, as I was cleaning out old boxes, I found our wedding album. For a moment, I debated throwing it away, but instead I sat down and flipped through the pages. There we were, young and smiling, full of hope. It hurt to look at those pictures, but it also reminded me of how far I had come. I wasn't that naive girl anymore. I was stronger, wiser, sharper. I closed the album, tucked it back into the box, and placed it on the shelf. It wasn't something I wanted to display, but I didn't need to destroy it either. It was part of my story, but it no longer defined me. The real turning point came when Jacob called me months later. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. His voice was tired, defeated. "Christy," he said quietly, "I just wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything." For a long moment, I didn't respond. My mind replayed every lie, every betrayal, every tear I had shed. But instead of anger, I felt calm. "I know you're sorry," I said finally. "But sorry doesn't change what happened. It doesn't erase the choices you made." "I know," he whispered. "I just needed to tell you." When the call ended, I sat in silence for a while, then smiled. His apology didn't matter, not because I didn't deserve one, but because I no longer needed it. My healing didn't depend on him anymore. As the seasons changed, so did I. My studio flourished, my friendships deepened, and I even began to open myself up to the possibility of love again. I wasn't rushing into anything, but I realized that Jacob's betrayal hadn't ruined me for love. If anything, it had taught me what I would never accept again: lies, manipulation, erasure. The next man in my life, if there ever was one, would meet a woman who knew her worth, who demanded honesty, who would never again be silenced. One evening, standing in the lavender twilight outside my studio, I thought about revenge. Had I gotten it? Yes. Jacob had lost everything he valued: his career, his reputation, his mistress. But more than that, I had gained everything he had tried to take from me: my strength, my independence, my identity. The real revenge wasn't in watching him fall. It was in rising higher than he ever imagined I could. And that's the story I carry with me now. Not the story of a woman betrayed, but the story of a woman reborn. A woman who stared betrayal in the face and refused to break. A woman who took back her life and built it stronger than before. I am Christy. I was Jacob's wife for 14 years, but now I am my own. And that, more than anything, is the ending I never saw coming, but the one I will cherish for the rest of my life.